I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about what time it was or whether I was still half asleep. When my phone lit up at 2:37 in the morning and I saw my daughter's name on the screen, something in my chest already knew it wasn't good. "Dad." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, I need you to come get me." "I'm already up," I said. "Where are you?" "I'm at the house. His parents' house. I can't—" "Dad, I can't do this anymore. Please just come." Then the line went quiet. Not dead, just quiet, like she'd pressed the phone against her leg or covered it with her hand. I heard a door somewhere. A voice. A man's voice, sharp and low. Then nothing. I didn't call the police. I know people will say I should have. Maybe they're right. But I was 63 years old. I'd been a father for 35 of those years, and there are moments when your brain stops doing the calculating and your feet start moving on their own. I was in my truck before I even had both shoes on. My daughter, Phoebe, had married into a family that smiled at you with their whole face while their eyes stayed perfectly still. Her husband, Cody, was their youngest son, and the way they talked about him, the way his mother especially talked about him, you'd think the man had never once in his life done anything wrong. Maybe he hadn't, not at first. But people change when they think no one's watching, and Phoebe had been watching for 3 years. She'd come to me in pieces over those years. A comment here. A bruise, she explained away there. I'd asked her directly once, sitting at my kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee between us, and she'd shaken her head and said, "It's not like that, Dad. It's complicated." I didn't push. I wish I had. I'll carry that the rest of my life. It was 40 minutes from my house to the neighborhood where Cody's parents lived. One of those communities out past the highway, houses that all look like slightly different versions of the same house, big driveways, decorative shutters that don't actually shut anything. I made it in 32. The lights were on downstairs when I pulled up. The porch light, too. Like they were expecting someone. Or like whatever was happening inside had been happening for a while. I knocked, firm, 3 times. The woman who opened the door, Cody's mother, Diane, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as prepared, like she'd already rehearsed this moment. "Walter," she said, not a greeting, just my name, flat. "Where's Phoebe?" "She's resting. She had a difficult evening. We're handling it." "She called me," I said. "She asked me to come get her." Diane tilted her head slightly, the way you do when you're about to explain something to someone you've decided is being unreasonable. She was upset. She gets that way sometimes. "There's no need for this. I'd like to see my daughter. She's sleeping now. Then I'd like to wake her up." She moved into the doorframe. Subtle, but deliberate. "I don't think that's a good idea. You showing up here in the middle of the night isn't helping anyone. You're just going to agitate things further." I looked at this woman, her pressed robe, her hair still neat, her hands folded in front of her. And I thought about my daughter's voice on that phone. The way it had dropped to a whisper. The way the line had gone quiet right when that man's voice appeared. "Diane," I said quietly, "I'm not leaving without seeing her." She stepped back then and let me in. Not because she wanted to, I could see that. But something in my voice or my face must have told her that the alternative was worse. The house was the kind of clean that's meant to be seen. Staged, almost. Cody's father, Russell, was sitting in the living room in an armchair, and he stood up when I walked in with the slow deliberateness of a man who wants you to understand he isn't threatened. "Walter," he said, like his wife had, "this is a family matter." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here. I'm her family. We mean our family." I didn't dignify that. I looked past him toward the hallway. "Phoebe," I called out, not yelling, just a voice that carries. The kind of voice you develop after 35 years of calling kids to dinner or in from the yard. "Phoebe, it's Dad. I'm here." A door at the end of the hall opened. She looked small in it. That's the only word I have. My daughter, who had played varsity soccer and once argued a traffic ticket down to nothing in front of a municipal judge, looked small standing in that doorway in borrowed clothes with her arms wrapped around herself. There was something wrong with the left side of her face. The light wasn't good, but I could see it. Dad. Her voice broke on the word. I started down the hall. Diane stepped in front of me, faster than I expected. You are not going to march through this house like you own it. Then get out of my way, so I don't have to. She is not leaving with you. She belongs here. This is her home. Her husband is. Where is her husband? Silence. Where is Cody, Diane? More silence. Russell had come into the hallway behind me. I was aware of him the way you're aware of weather. He's not here right now, Diane said finally. Uh-huh. I kept my eyes on her. So you're standing in a hallway at 3 a.m. blocking me from my daughter, and the man who's supposed to be her husband isn't even here. That about right? She straightened. She is not in the condition to make decisions right now. She's emotional. She's been saying things that aren't. Dad. Phoebe had come down the hall on her own. She was holding on to the wall a little. Dad, I want to go. Okay, I said. Just that. She is not leaving. Diane's voice had changed. Not louder, but harder. The warmth had come off it entirely, the way paint strips off a wall in the cold. If she walks out of this house tonight, Cody will have no choice but that there will be legal implications. She signs an agreement when they marry. And if she... What kind of agreement? A private family agreement about assets and a prenup. It's more comprehensive than that. I looked at Phoebe. She gave me the smallest nod. I'd seen it. The side of her face. The way she was holding her ribs when she breathed. I took out my phone. What are you doing? Diane asked. Calling 911. The room changed. Russell made a sound like he was about to say something. Diane's hand came up slightly. The way you reach out to stop something from falling off a shelf. Phoebe's eyes went wide, not with fear, but with something that looked like relief. Like she'd been waiting for someone to do this simple, obvious thing and couldn't understand why it had taken so long. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I told them I was at the address, that my daughter had called me, that she appeared to have injuries, and that I was requesting both police and an ambulance. I gave them my name and I gave them the address twice. I stayed calm. I've had that kind of calm before. Not the calm of someone who isn't afraid, but the calm of someone who's decided that fear isn't useful right now. Diane spent the 4 minutes before the police arrived alternating between threatening me with property trespass claims and trying to talk to Phoebe in a low, urgent voice about family loyalty and what this would look like and how Cody would be devastated. Phoebe sat next to me on the couch and didn't say a single word to her. She just held my hand with both of hers and stared at a point on the wall across the room. The first officers who arrived were professional and thorough. They separated us immediately. One officer stayed with me in the living room. Another took Phoebe to the kitchen. A third walked Diane and Russell to the far side of the house. I heard Phoebe talking in the kitchen. I couldn't make out words, but her voice was steady. Steadier than it had been on the phone. Steadier than it had been in the doorway. Like the presence of a badge and a notepad had given her something solid to stand on. The ambulance crew arrived about 8 minutes after the police. I watched them walk past me toward the kitchen where Phoebe was, and I sat there with my hands on my knees and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I prayed. Not formally. Not out loud. Just a quiet conversation with whatever is out there, asking for her to be okay. Asking for that specifically. Everything else could wait. She had 2 cracked ribs. A bruised jaw. Bruising on her upper arms consistent with, as the report would later say, having been grabbed and shaken with force. She hadn't been unconscious when I arrived. She'd locked herself in the guest room, which was why I hadn't seen her immediately. She'd called me from in there. Then Cody's mother had knocked, and she'd hidden the phone. Cody was picked up at his friend's apartment across town at approximately 4:15 in the morning. He didn't resist. His lawyer arrived 45 minutes later, and I'm told the lawyer looked a great deal more worried than Cody did, which tells you something about who understood the situation better. There's a lot that happened in the days and weeks after that. I won't go through in full detail because it's not mine entirely to tell. Some of it belongs to Phoebe, and she'll share what she wants to share when she's ready. What I can tell you is that Russell sat across from me in a mediator's office 3 weeks later and tried to tell me that their family was being unfairly targeted, that Cody had a temper but wasn't a bad person, and that perhaps if Phoebe had been a more supportive wife, none of this would have escalated. I let him finish. I've learned over 63 years that there's value in letting people talk themselves into corners. Then I told him that I'd spent 30 years as a civil engineer running public infrastructure contracts for the county, that I knew every inspector, every zoning board member, and every city attorney in a 3-county area, and that the commercial property his son's family business operated on had some outstanding permit discrepancies that I'd been too polite to mention until now. I said it without raising my voice. I said it the way you state a fact. Russell didn't say much after that. I'm not proud of leveraging that, but I'm also not going to pretend I didn't do it. My daughter was sitting in a physical therapist's office twice a week working on breathing without pain. Whatever tools I had, I used. The prenuptial agreement turned out to be significantly less ironclad than Diane had implied. Phoebe's attorney, a woman in her 40s with the kind of organized calm that I imagine makes judges nervous, found 3 provisions that were either unenforceable under state law or had been signed under conditions that raised serious questions about informed consent. The whole thing unraveled faster than the other side expected. Cody pleaded guilty to domestic battery in the 4th month. His attorney had advised him that a trial would be worse. He was right. Phoebe didn't have to testify. She'd given her statement, and between that and the medical records and the responding officer's reports, the case was more than sufficient. The morning of the sentencing, I drove Phoebe to the courthouse. We didn't talk much on the way. She had her coffee. I had mine. The radio was on some station she likes, that I pretend to tolerate. When we parked, she sat for a moment with her hand on the door handle. "You know," she said, "when I called you that night, I didn't really know what I was asking for. I just knew I needed to hear your voice." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to call." I put my hand over hers on the door handle. "You called," I said. "That's what matters." She nodded. We got out of the car. The courthouse steps were wet from rain the night before. She took my arm on the way up. Not because she needed to. Her ribs had healed. She was moving fine. But because she wanted to. I noticed that. A father notices things like that. Inside, we sat in the 2nd row. Cody came in with his attorney and his parents behind him. Diane looked at Phoebe once, briefly, and then looked away. Whatever she'd been hoping to communicate in that look, I couldn't tell. Maybe she didn't know either. The judge was a man in his 60s, gray at the temples, with reading glasses he kept taking on and off. He read the statement of facts without particular emotion. He asked Cody if he understood the terms of his plea. Cody said yes. The judge sentenced him to 18 months, suspended after 6 with 3 years probation and mandatory completion of a batterer's intervention program. People have opinions about whether that was enough. I'm not going to weigh in on that here. What I can tell you is that when the gavel came down, Phoebe exhaled slowly and set her shoulders back, and something in her posture shifted in a way I hadn't seen since before she'd met him. Like a door she'd been holding closed for 3 years had finally been taken off its hinges. After it was over, we went to a diner a few blocks away and ordered breakfast food, even though it was almost noon. Phoebe got the pancakes. I got eggs and toast. We sat in a booth by the window and ate without talking all that much, and it was the most comfortable silence I'd sat in for as long as I could remember. She moved back into her old room for a few months after that. I told her it was just until she got her footing. She told me she knew. She was back in her own apartment by spring, a different one, a 3rd-floor place with good locks and a doorman, and a view of a small park. I've thought a lot about that night, about the 40 minutes on the highway, the porch light, Diane in the doorway, about the way Phoebe looked, standing at the end of that hall, and the way she looked 3 months later standing at the bottom of the stairs in my house with a box of her things to take to the new apartment. They were the same person. Of course they were, but it was like looking at 2 different photographs of the same place taken years apart, same location, different light. I'm 63 years old. I've built things that are still standing. I've buried people I loved. I've made mistakes I won't minimize and done a few things I'm actually proud of. But when people ask me, and they do, sometimes, at the kinds of barbecues or holiday dinners where conversation turns to these things, when they ask me what I think matters most about being a father, I always come back to the same answer. Answer your phone, no matter what time it is. Answer your phone, get in the car, and go. The rest you figure out when you get there. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what it actually taught me. Not the dramatic parts, those are easy to point to. I mean the quieter parts. The parts that don't make for good storytelling, but are probably more true. What I keep coming back to is this. The people in that house that night, Diane and Russell, they weren't stupid. They weren't even, in the ordinary sense of the word, evil. They were people who had spent decades protecting something, a version of their son, a version of their family, and they'd gotten so good at it that they'd stopped being able to see what that protection was costing everyone around them. That's not a mystery. That's just what happens when you let self-interest go unchecked long enough. It calcifies. It stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like the natural order of things. And then one night, a 63-year-old man shows up at your door, and the whole structure comes down. I think about Phoebe, too. About the 3 years she spent trying to hold things together inside that marriage, trying to be reasonable, trying to give Cody the benefit of the doubt. People sometimes ask why someone stays in a situation like that. And I used to think I understood the answer. I understand it better now. It's not weakness. It's almost the opposite. It takes a particular kind of strength to keep believing that something can be fixed even when the evidence is pointing the other way. The problem is that same strength, pointed in the wrong direction, can keep you in a burning building. What Phoebe had to learn, what she did learn, in her own time, was how to turn that determination toward herself instead of toward him. That's not a small thing. That's one of the hardest redirections a person can make. And me. I've thought about my own part in this, the years I didn't push harder when she said things were complicated. There's no clean answer there. You raise your kids to be independent, and then you try to respect that independence even when it scares you. Sometimes you get the balance wrong. I got it wrong for too long. What I know is that when it mattered most, I answered the phone and I got in the truck. And I didn't talk myself out of it with what ifs and maybe I should waits. That wasn't courage, exactly. It was just clarity. When everything else falls away, you find out what you're actually made of. I found out I was made of the thing that drove 40 minutes in the dark and knocked on a lit-up door and said plainly, I'm not leaving without seeing her. I've lived long enough to know that outcomes follow actions, and actions follow character. The reason things turned out the way they did, Cody facing consequences, Phoebe getting free, the agreement unraveling, wasn't luck. It was a chain of choices going back years. Diane and Russell chose to cover for their son over and over. Cody chose to take the protection he was given and spend it badly. Phoebe eventually chose to make one phone call. I chose to answer it. Every link in that chain led somewhere. They always do. What I'd want anyone to take from this, if they take anything, is simpler than it sounds. Do the right thing even when it's costly. Think clearly when emotion is pulling you toward panic. And when someone you love is in trouble, don't calculate. Just go. The rest has a way of following.